Ooh, boo! Happy Halloween, everybody! Thank you for downloading.
You scared me.
I try. See? I said boo, and I scared you because it's Halloween. Hello, everyone. Larry here.
And Anthony here.
Happy Halloween, sir.
Happy Halloween to you, too.
Ooh, boy. I gotta get ready to hand out the candy and everything. Fun.
Oh, I would love to do that, but I'm not going to.
The part of Halloween that I don't miss.
Well, I'm just thankful that I don't have candy sitting in my house because I usually wind up eating it all.
Honestly, right? Where I live, I got the doors in the back of the house and no one knows about it. So I'm safe.
Well, I've had the same thing, too. I mean, every apartment I've lived in for 10 years, and the last 10 years, like, I've never been in an apartment where people would come knock on the door asking for candy.
And if they do, you better be worried.
I was going to say, either that or they know better.
Well, they have to knock on doors to tell you they live there.
More or less.
So this is a frightful time of year. I'll tell you that much. Are you a fan of Halloween?
I'm a huge fan of Halloween. It's maybe my favorite holiday of the year, which I always find kind of ironic because I spent most of my life not dressing up for Halloween.
But we sure did watch a lot of these type of movies growing up. I'll tell you that much. We, if you don't know already, we've known each other for, 20 years at this point? Yeah, for a long, long time.
For over 20 years.
Yeah.
Now.
And I'm not really a horror fan, but everyone I hung out with was a horror fan. And we certainly watched our plethora of horror movies.
Yeah, horror's been my genre since I was like 5 or 6 years old. I remember the very first movie, horror movie I saw was House, which wasn't really a horror movie necessarily. It's more like a horror comedy. But when you're like 6 years old or 7 years old or whenever the hell that movie came out, and you go to the movie theater with your next door neighbor and his mom to go see that movie, and she, of course, back then in the 80s, people didn't research movies, so what do they know? It's like, so, I think we stayed in the theater for all of 10 minutes before his mom took us out of there, because like within the first like 5 or 10 minutes of the movie, like this woman hangs herself.
Ooh, nice.
So that so didn't get to see a lot of the movie. Of course, later on in life, I picked it up in a video store and watched it, but the two things I got out of that is one, as a kid, seeing a woman hang herself in, the first 5 minutes of a film definitely traumatized me. And the second thing that comes out of that story is one of those life lessons of, how small the world is? The world is this small. The kid in the opening scene from that movie, who finds the woman hanging herself is my landlord right now.
Are you kidding me? For real?
Nope, I am dead serious. He is my landlord. He's a professional actor. He actually started his own TV series in the 90s, but he is currently a good friend of mine and my landlord, and he was in the very first scene in the very first horror movie I ever saw.
When did you put that two and two together?
I forgot when we were talking about it one day, and he was like, I was in all these movies, yada, yada, yada. And I'm like, and then I went on IMDb and looked at the list of stuff, and I'm like, oh, he was in, he was a lead in this TV series in the 90s and all this stuff. And I'm like, wait a minute, House. I go, who the hell did he play in House? So I asked him, he's like, oh yeah, he's like, I was the kid in the first scene who found the woman hanging. I'm like, oh my God. I was like, you scared the shit out of me when I was a kid. Sorry, cursing. My bad.
We're gonna let it go at this point. It's all right.
But it's just one of those weird things where it's like, okay, like 30 something years later, here I am, friends with this guy who's in, who was in the original House, and I also found out from him that I know. And then at one point in his life, he's actually still good. He's actually still friends with this guy, but he was roommates with Andrus Jones, and Andrus Jones played Rick in A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 4.
Okay.
And he was also, to segue over into the video game references, he was also one of the characters in the Sega CD horror game Night Trap.
Wow. You got a lot of good connections. At what point does Kevin Bacon come into play with these connections?
It hasn't happened yet, but I bet you, I think I'm maybe like 1 or 2 degrees off, so I'm not far.
But no, that's pretty wild that between your landlord being in a movie that scared the hell out of you in the beginning of your movie watching days, and I guess we can maybe one day interview someone who was actually in a real video game with Sega CD.
Yeah, I would love to. I would love to make that connection. I've never actually met Andrew Jones.
Oh,
okay. I don't know how often he talks to him, but I would love to. I would love to make that connection. I think that would be awesome. Not only that, but to also talk to somebody who starred in Nightmare on Elm Street movie would be
great. Right? No, that's pretty cool. Yeah, that's pretty sweet.
So especially since Nightmare on Elm Street is my favorite horror series. So
over Friday the 13th.
Oh yeah, hands down.
Okay.
Nightmare on Elm Street is by far has always been my favorite.
Fair enough. And it's actually, Nightmare on Elm Street. Nightmare on Elm Street, I think, is the game when I was at the Game Expo, right? That was one I was trying to find. You asked me to see, which
that was the one I was trying to have you get your hands on because I had I've owned Nightmare on Elm Street for NES for like the longest time, and for some odd reason, I don't know, with my various moves cross country, back and forth and stuff like that, it seemed to have disappeared from my collection. So I need to get my hands on that again.
Yeah, they had a ton of Friday the 13th, but no Nightmare. So
Friday the 13th is a pretty common game. In fact, a friend of mine actually gave me a copy of Friday the 13th for NES in the original packaging with the instruction booklet, which is really awesome.
Yeah.
So, I'm definitely cherishing that, but I got to get my hands on a Nightmare on Elm Street. That's like a must-own for me.
Was it a good game? I don't think I've played Friday the 13th, which I wasn't crazy about, but I never played Nightmare on Elm Street for NES.
Well, Nightmare on, I loved it because, being a fan of the films, it was a bit of a lift from the films, not exact lift, of course, because they had to adjust it and whatnot. Yeah. But there were elements from my, probably one of my all-time favorite nightmares, which was Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors. And, Dream Warriors was the one with Patricia Arquette, and they were all in the mental hospital. And when they would go to sleep, when they would fall asleep, they would all pick up special abilities. So, like, in her dream, Patricia Arquette was like she was really good at gymnastics, and this other kid was a wizard, and this other guy was super strong and stuff like that. So they took some of those elements and they put it into the NES game. So when you're running around, Elm Street, you're collecting Freddy's bones, and the idea is to take his bones, bring him to the junkyard, and bury them, because that was pretty much the plot in Nightmare on Elm Street 3. But what would happen, throughout the game is you would fall asleep, and then Freddy would. There were different parts of Freddy that would come after you. In one level, it's his claw, and another level, it's other elements of him. Yeah. But like a snake's head, which is basically again all lifted from part 3. But when you would fall asleep, if you collected icons, you would have different superpowers. So you can become a ninja or a wizard or an athlete that would throw javelins. So you would at least have some type of offense to fight Freddy.
Didn't Freddy play a Nintendo in one of the nightmares?
Yes, in Freddy's Dead, the final nightmare.
Oh, that one? Okay.
Yeah, the god-awful one that was in 3D for the last 20 minutes. But yeah, so in that movie, he kills somebody through video game. Actually, he kills Breckin Meyer.
Oh, really?
Breckin Meyer was a stoner who liked to play video games, and Freddy got to kill him in a video game.
Like a power glove or something on it? Or something like that?
And famous lines, because they ripped the controller out of Freddy's hand, and he uses the power glove to finish off Breckin Meyer. It definitely, at that point, Freddy had become pretty much a joke in the films. It was a little too hokey at that point. But I will say Nightmare on Elm Street for NES was definitely, for me, granted, the game itself, a lot of people didn't like it. It didn't have the best reviews. But for me, just an homage to, the series, I thought it was awesome. And they also had a game on Commodore 64 as well. That was also a lift from Nightmare on Elm Street 3. And you got to play as the characters from Nightmare on Elm Street 3. So you got to play as Nancy, and you got to play as Kincaid, and it was I never got an opportunity to really play it. I've seen screenshots and video of it, and it's a game that I need to get my hands on. So those are the only 2 Nightmare on Elm Street games that I'm aware of.
And I horror, again, big with the horror genre between movies and wasn't really crazy about the video game horrors, but they definitely, especially nowadays, have a place in home consoles. But to me, horror games really picked up PlayStation 1, but before that, Nintendo had maybe like 2 or 3. The PC, Commodore 64, I think had like all the horror games back then. I mean, some on Genesis.
I think so. Well, no, to be honest with you, yeah, I really think PlayStation picked up. Like, I can only, like, from my memory, I mean, I can think of a handful of games that I personally played and loved. But, yeah, for me, Commodore 64 was Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th, actually. They were two of my favorites. And Friday the 13th on Commodore 64 was basically you were a camp counselor and you were going around trying to find a way to kill Jason, but Jason was disguised as another camp counselor. So you had to figure out which one was Jason and kill him before he kills everybody else. Mm-hmm. And I just remember playing this in the basement at my cousin's house because he had the Commodore 64. Oh. And what would happen is, one by one the counselors would get picked off, and if you did not figure out who Jason was by the time he killed the last counselor, all of a sudden this when he killed the last one outside of yourself, when he killed the last one, the screen would go black and this giant severed head would just appear on the screen with this music, and it would just freak you out. It was awesome.
Which back then was wild. I mean, to see something like that on the NES, I think it said like "You're dead." It was like one of the first games that actually said like, "You're dead."
Yeah, something like that, which was really awesome. And again, I remember playing that one and having a blast. And then there was the NES version of Friday the 13th, which was not a very good game.
No. It has the classic Jason, though, the best looking Jason.
Yes. The best, definitely the most colorful Jason you'll ever see. Purple and teal, I believe his mask was.
Oh, man.
But a few years ago at Comic-Con, I forgot which company made an exclusive Friday the 13th action figure of Jason based off of the video game, which I have. And with the way video games are and how cyclical they are, now we're on the precipice of a new Friday the 13th game coming out for the PC, which I know is not a retro game, but just the idea of showing the staying power of certain horror genre, totally. Horror film franchises or just franchises in general, because there were plenty of horror games that were video games before film. No
doubt. And definitely film, lent itself to a lot of games, some of which really never made it far into the home systems. I mean, even going back to Atari even had its fair share of horror games, specifically Halloween and Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yeah. And so it's actually
I was going to say, I don't think they sold them in like boxes. Like they were like almost like the adult games. Like you had to find them in like some, the back room of some, trading post or something.
Well, yeah, I think the issue with those were again, video game systems in the beginning were like family consoles. They were really catering to more kids. Mm-hmm. So when they were putting out games like that I guess were a little more R-rated, they would I think they would kind of hide them a little bit more because those were for adults only. You didn't want an 8-year-old coming in and buying a Halloween or a Texas Chainsaw Massacre game because that's just a little bit irresponsible. This is way before video games had a rating system.
Oh, way before. Yeah, we're talking Atari 2600 for Halloween, and I think the same in Texas.
Yeah, and Texas Chainsaw. But then for those, like they also had like I guess you want to call them more PG version. They had Haunted House, which was like the horror version of Adventure. Mm-hmm. So and that was more like a little point, like little I don't want to say RPG-esque, but you walk around collecting certain items in the house. So I mean horror games have definitely existed all the way back to the early days of consoles.
Yeah, no, it's definitely had its fair share. Was there much on? Do you remember any on like Genesis and stuff like that? Well, hold on. Before I get into that, Genesis, yes, because as I asked the question, I remember Splatterhouse 2 on Genesis, which was one of the I think one of the games that really started the whole move to get ratings going on video games. I mean, I know Mortal Kombat really kicked it into high gear, but I remember people complaining about Splatterhouse, even Splatterhouse 1 on TurboGrafx, which I remember a buddy of mine had TurboGrafx 16, and somehow he got his hands on Splatterhouse, and I just remember eventually, I guess once his mother figured out what the game was, she was not happy about it, because it's almost like you're playing like a jacked up Jason, got, hockey mask, but he's all hulked up, and just going through and it's just bloody, violent, gory, just, what a teenager wants to play.
Yeah, I remember at that time, because I had Splatterhouse 3 for Genesis, if I remember correctly. Mm-hmm. Just the blood that used to just pour out of all the enemies that you would beat the crap out of. It was just
cut them in half and stuff. Oh, it got wild.
Yeah, there was just all kinds of crazy stuff you did to them. So, I believe that was definitely one of the games. It may have been one of the games cited when they finally, went to court and got the rating system. Of course, Mortal Kombat is the most infamous of it.
Yeah, that's the one that pushed it over the fence. But.
Yeah, there's no question about that. So yeah, I mean, just as systems evolved, games were going to get more graphic. I mean, for every racing game or RPG, everything got prettier. For horror games, everything got gorier. I mean, that was the whole point. You wanted it to make it look as realistic as possible, and that's what happened when you got to Genesis, and then of course, way more with PC games, PlayStation games, and stuff like that. So,
and we're talking like a lot of the movie genres, which nowadays that's really picking it up. And Splatterhouse was one of the first original games. I mean, we opened the show with a game that you kind of, when you look back on it, you may not think it's horror related, but it had some little bit of creepiness to it. It was the Castlevania series, because remember back then, being younger, dealing with Dracula and everything, kind of freaks you out a little bit.
Well, no, I mean, I would definitely categorize Castlevania as a horror game franchise. There's no question about it. I mean, you want to think, you can't think of a more iconic villain in the horror genre than Dracula. I mean, so making him the final boss in the series, right there, then and there, you got your horror game right there, and then you would play, you'd fight against vampire bats and Medusa. So they were Frankenstein. Mummy, yeah. So I mean, the Mummy. They really covered, every classic horror genre in the Castlevania series. So I mean, I would definitely put that almost at the top of the list.
I was going to say it's almost like they were like the first Castlevania. When you think about it, was kind of like just trying to. An homage, if you will, to the old Universal monster movies with Frankenstein, Mummy, even I'm sure not the Blue Lagoon monster, but Blue Lagoon, no, Black Lagoon,
Creature from the
Blue Lagoon was
Blue Lagoon was a terrible movie. So Creature from the Black Lagoon, yes.
So so it's kind of like an homage to that too, which those movies still hold up nowadays. So so does Castlevania. Castlevania 2, not so much.
Well, the interesting thing about Castlevania 2, I mean, because actually I played through Castlevania 2 a couple of times because I really enjoyed it. I think it was the first pseudo RPG thing game that I played. But again, talking about horror franchises or horror games, I mean, the whole point of Castlevania 2 is you're collecting Dracula's body parts to put him back together so you can kill him once and for all. Why the logic behind that, I don't know why. I mean, since he's broken up into different body parts, I mean, wouldn't he stay dead if you just left him alone? But,
oh, totally. And it's the easiest boss battle in any of the series anyway.
Yes, if you have the holy water.
Exactly. Yeah, 1, 2, 3.
And you're going to learn. You will learn that soon when it's your turn to play Castlevania.
I'm still debating whether to get the console or just do it on the mini NES. I'll probably do it on the mini NES.
I would say do the mini NES because I'm not getting finishing Shining Force 2 anytime soon.
Fair enough.
Still got to get to that.
And of course, one of the scariest things about Castlevania 2 is every time it turned to night and turned to day. God, that was horrible.
Well, that was the biggest problem with the game because it would take like a minute for it to turn, and that was the biggest problem in the game, because you're sitting there and you're trying to just play through, and all of a sudden, what a horrible night to have a curse. I'm like, all right, but can we speed it up?
There was a game, I don't know if it was just a homebrew one-shot, because I remember the Angry Video Game Nerd played it. Someone either made or mass-marketed Castlevania 2, but fixed all of those problems. Like, it went to day and night, was like that. All the stupid, like, everyone you spoke to in Castlevania 2 gave you no tips, gave you no hints. They were all useless. But in this new game, everyone gave hints, gave tips, even told you where to bend, where to kneel with the ring and everything.
Yeah.
So
the orb, the white orb.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. So I can't remember. It was Castlevania. It was kind of a subtitle. I don't know if you can probably find it somewhere on eBay or something. But it really kind of picked up the speed.
And you're better off playing that version, because I guarantee you, removing all those obnoxious elements from it, it's actually a pretty good game.
I'll let you know.
I was going to say, to me, it almost plays similar to Zelda 2, Adventure of Link.
Yes, actually, you're right. I agree with you on that one. Yeah, short of the overworld map. So.
Exactly, short of the overworld map, it's kind of similar to that. Yeah, so yeah, Castlevania, and of course, the Castlevania series has persevered beyond NES. Castlevania Symphony of the Night for PlayStation is probably one of my favorite games of all time. Just a beautiful, beautiful game. Between the graphics, the music, the difficulty, everything about that game was just perfect.
Soundtrack was awesome on that. It's one of the few games you can pop into a regular CD and play.
Yep. And then when you thought you had the game beat, and then it just turned upside down on you, and you had to play it through again. It was just crazy.
Oh, don't even remind me about that part. No, that game rocked. Symphony of the Night. And Castlevania was a good, it was a horror genre, but let's talk about, real creepy horror games, which, again, PC, we're going to get to PlayStation, we're going to get to the big one in a little bit, but,
the obvious big one.
Yeah. But, I mean, Clock Tower,
Clock Tower is one of the ones that I like. Again, it's not that's the type of game. It's not for everybody because it plays really slow. Mm-hmm. But it's basically a slasher movie in the form of a video game. So you are one of two lead female characters. You actually choose. It's almost a little like choose your own adventure, depending on what choices you make, where you decide to go search first, and what information you find out would dictate who you were as the lead, and then eventually what ending you get for the game, because there were 10 different endings for that game. And then what would happen is you would get to different parts of the day where Scissor Man, who was the killer in those games.
That's the whole thing, yep.
Yep, where Scissor Man would show up, and then it was basically a straight-up slasher movie where you're hiding and fighting your way just to survive the night before before he kills you. And I just remember, loving that game because I had picked up that game right around the time that Scream had come out in theaters, and of course, Scream is another one of my all-time favorites. Thank you, Wes Craven. May you rest in peace. So Clock Tower to me was almost like, oh man, if they could make Scream into a video game, this would be the video game for it. And in fact, they were supposed to make a Scream video game, and they wound up scrapping it.
Oh, really?
It was on the docket for a while. I think it was either after the second movie or right before the third one came out that they were planning a Scream video game, and then it just never came to be. Oh. Unfortunately, because I think it would have made a great game. But yeah, the Clock Tower series was an excellent series. It actually originated on PC.
You're right. Then it moved to PlayStation. I did say PC.
Yeah, there was on PC. The first game to start Scissor Man was a game called D. It was just the letter D. Mm-hmm. And then the girl, the lead girl from D, transferred into Clock Tower, and then you had the Clock Tower series happen. And then Clock Tower 3 was on PlayStation 2, which I also own.
Yeah, so that was I never played it, but again, I've seen some stuff from it. It's kind of
some fun stuff. Absolutely some fun stuff. But switching back over to PC, what? Go ahead.
No, I was going to say. Then you had others I don't know if you ever played Seventh Guest, 11th Hour. You ever play those games?
Oh, we've talked about those before on the podcast. So Seventh Guest is by far probably one of my favorite games of all time. First off, it was one of the first games I personally ever played with full motion video. And then just, again, I mean, I'm a horror kid. Anything, give me a haunted house, a spooky house where weird things are happening, and I'm all in. So, I mean, just going through that game and solving puzzle on top of puzzle just to determine what happened to the six guests inside this house and who the seventh guest was, and watching everybody meet their demise as you were solving all of these really cryptic puzzles in this spooky house was just an absolute treat for me. I've probably played through that game more than any other game I've played. I think I played through that game at least half a dozen times.
Oh, man.
And then 11th Hour, which they tried to capitalize on, the seventh guest with the sequel, wasn't as good. The acting was as crummy as the first one, but the story itself was kind of weak. They did offer 3 different endings for the 11th Hour, which was interesting. It was obvious which one the right ending was, of course, but definitely 2 really great games. And if you're into puzzle solving kind of games with that first person perspective, and you like horror, even today, you can go on Steam and download Seventh Guest, and I strongly recommend it because it's fantastic. And then just to wrap it up really quickly on Seventh Guest, there's a fan site that's been developing a sequel to Seventh Guest, to 11th Hour, so this would be the 3rd game in the series. So they were doing a fan-made sequel, Seventh Guest 3, and they started it like 10 years ago. I remember because I found the website really early on, and I had been following their updates, and they're this guy doing it in his spare time with a bunch of other people that he got on board to do it for free. But they had gotten to a point where they developed it to a point where they went on Kickstarter to raise money to finish the game, and they actually managed to get in touch with the original company, which is defunct now, Trilobite, to get the license to sell the game.
Oh, wow.
And they got the license to sell the game. They raised the money on Kickstarter, and they are rapidly developing the game now. And they actually got the original actor who played the bad guy in the Seventh Guest, who was called Henry Stoff. They got the original actor to come back to shoot the scenes for the new one.
There you go.
So, yeah, so it's really interesting to see how, today's technology can help bring back yesterday's games, or sequels to yesterday's games. So, it's just an awesome story there.
No, that's pretty cool. I didn't realize. I
actually gave money to the Kickstarter too, so I will be getting a copy of that game when it comes out.
There you go. Game on.
It will also be available on, I believe, Xbox One and PS4 because they raised enough money to release it on those.
Oh, sweet.
Yep.
Be on the lookout for that. What's one again besides the big series, which we'll talk about in a little bit?
Right.
What's probably the creepiest game that you've played?
Ooh. Creepiest game.
And if it's part of the series we're going to talk about, we'll get to in a little bit.
No, I mean, that one, notwithstanding, will always be creepy. There was one game I always wanted to play called Phantasmagoria, which also I believe was
God
named.
bless you.
Yeah, I know. Phantasmagoria was another one of those full motion video games, kind of like Seventh Guest on the PC. And I believe it may have been one of the games that was named when they started doing the rating system, because there were scenes filmed in that were basically horror movie scenes where you were watching people getting brutally murdered.
Oh man!
And it did not hold back. I remember seeing some of the cut scenes from that, and even I remember cringing a little bit.
It's like Faces of Death.
Yeah, well, not that bad. Faces of Death, but yeah, that was a game I always wanted to own, but I never did. So it looked creepy, but based on my list of stuff that I have here of horror games, I probably say one of the, and it's not the creepiest one, but I love the concept of it. So it definitely had moments where you would jump, was a game on Dreamcast called Illbleed. And the concept of Illbleed was simple. You were, there were 5 levels in the game, and they were all it was like a creepy fun house or amusement park and all, a mansion. And on every level there was a different killer. So it was and they would, it was kind of similar to you had a Texas Chainsaw kind of killer. You had a giant killer clown kind of killer. But the way the game went was you would walk through this house, and your health meter was your heartbeat, basically. And you had to be careful as you were going through the house because things would jump out and scare you, like ghosts would come out of pictures, or a trap would come out of nowhere. Like all these scary supernatural elements would happen, and if you weren't careful enough to dodge them, you would have a heart attack and die.
Oh my god!
So, and you got to choose. I believe, if I remember correctly, you got to choose different characters, so there were different. You had different attributes.
Okay.
So some of them, one or two were stronger than the other ones were a little bit weaker. Some of them had stronger hearts than the other, if I'm remembering it all correctly, because I haven't played the game in a really long time. But I just remember some of the moments, like if you're sitting there with the lights off, and like because you're literally like trying not to run through the game, because as you would run, all of a sudden something would jump out into the screen and scare the crap out of you. And then before you knew it, you were dead. So that was definitely a game that was like, I loved the concept. I loved the delivery of it. Mm-hmm. The biggest problem with it was I felt like it was too short. I mean, once you really got the hang of the game, you were through it in like maybe half an hour or 40 minutes. Yeah, or maybe an hour tops. But but I thought the concept itself was like, again, it's like, I'm a horror movie fan. I'm a huge horror movie fan. So if you can make a game that puts me in a horror movie, I'm all in. That's so cool. It's not right, and it's not a typical game for a gamer. A gamer would sit there and play this, and it's dumb. It may be dumb to them. I go, but for me, it's like, oh, cool. It's like I feel like I'm in a horror movie now, so I'm kind of enjoying the ride. So for me, that one was kind of fun. Same way, similar to Clock Tower.
No, totally. And curious, because another game you mentioned earlier when I was at that expo, besides Nightmare on Elm Street, Tecmo's Deception, right?
Yeah, Tecmo's Deception, and I've talked about this one a few times on on our podcast. And Tecmo's Deception was again, it was a nice little twist on the game where you were the bad guy. So you died, and your soul gets resurrected by a minion of Satan, and you have to do their bidding, or I forgot what the ultimate goal was, but basically the goal was you lured people to this mansion, and then what you would do is you would set traps around the mansion to capture them, and then once you captured them, you would suck out their life force, their soul, and then deliver their souls to Satan. So just totally different, totally creepy. Again, probably the first game I ever played where I was the bad guy, and I was like, okay, this is an interesting little twist. It's like, because you're doing evil, evil bidding. So yeah, and it's just always a game I remember. And again, it's another one of those games where it's like I never like sold it or traded it. I just lost it somewhere along the way. So I got. Yeah, and that's a tough one to track down because it's not a very well known game.
Yeah, I remember I was asking people at the show about it. No one really knew about it, so I was looking though.
It was only on PlayStation 1, to my knowledge. It wasn't on any other system. So, and again, like I said, it was just one of these rare games, and I'm sure it's sitting up on eBay. I've seen it up on eBay, and eventually I'll cave and buy it. So.
So now I got one more series. I don't know if you played it before we get to the big one that really kicked everything into motion. Silent Hill.
Silent Hill, yeah.
Did you ever get into Silent Hill? I remember I tried playing the first one.
I have one of them on Dreamcast, and I remember starting it, but never. At the time, I think Dreamcast was kind of fading, and we were moving into more. Xbox 360 land and stuff like that. So I remember starting I believe it was the first. I don't remember if it was the first or second game, but I remember starting it and thinking how cool it was. But it was a series that I never really jumped into completely.
Yeah.
I remember liking the first movie.
First movie was good. Yes.
First movie was good. The second one I didn't care for all that much.
I didn't see the
and I remember really enjoying the maze they did at Universal Studios Halloween Horror Nights based on Silent Hill.
Really?
Yeah, they did that a few years ago, and I went to that Halloween Horror Nights, and it was awesome. Like because they had like the creepy nurses popping out at you with the rays, and they had the guy on stilts with that, I don't even know, that pyramid shaped thing
really?
for a head.
Wow.
Remember that thing? And he would just literally like be walking on stilts and then like bend down and like he's right in your face. Like they did a really good job with that maze. It was a lot of fun. But again, that's one of those series where if I ever have the time, one of these years, I would love to go back and play through them all because I heard a lot. I heard nothing but good things for those games.
Yeah,
so
right.
it'd be interesting to go back and play them now.
Definitely creepy. But Silent Hill definitely had a lot of entries into what eventually became called survival horror games. And that whole genre would not be around if it wasn't for Resident Evil.
Yes.
And this game, one of the games at least, there was a ton of them that was put out. I'll talk about my experience because, again, I'm not into much horror games, but I did play Resident Evil, the remakes, granted, on GameCube, but still. Did you ever play the original Resident Evil, like PlayStation Resident Evil?
Oh yeah, no, I went out and bought it day one, and I still I still own it to this day.
Oh, that was so creepy. That mansion still gives me the willies.
Yeah, I mean, and the coolest thing about it, I mean, well, first off, the acting was straight out of a B horror movie. Which was
totally.
Awesome. I mean, the acting was just absolutely terrible.
Yeah.
Which I love, but just the whole idea of like you're being dumped in a mansion. And I still remember there are two big moments right in the beginning. It's that first moment when you go into a room and then there's somebody on the floor and then all of a sudden, like, it turns and looks at you and you can see that he's a zombie. Creepy as hell. But of course, the most memorable moment everybody always references, and I remember this too because I bought the game and I specifically sat in my room, turned off the lights because I'm like, I'm playing this right. It's a horror game. It's got to be played this way. Is when you're walking or running down this hallway and the demon dog or the zombie dog jumps through the window, crashes through the window. I remember jumping when that happened. And as soon as I jumped, I was like, the game had me. I was hooked.
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I mean, and just the rest of the game all the way through between the puzzles and the limited ammunition that you had, and
not only limited ammo, limited saves.
Yep, everything
God,
about
it.
It was difficult. It was frustrating, but it was so rewarding too because you would find once you would get through it, you would just like it felt like. You had that sense of satisfaction as if you were surviving in a horror movie where it's like, I made it. Thank God I made it. I didn't die. It's like, let me save. Hurry up. So,
it was wicked with those limited saves. My first Resident Evil was actually on N64, Resident Evil 2. And Resident Evil 2 with the, actually Nemesis was 3, but 2 was, one was the mansion. 2 brought it out to the streets, and then 3 had Nemesis just chasing you from the start of the game, pretty much.
Yeah.
But yeah, Resident Evil 2 on N64 was actually pretty good. I like the way that the controller, that's the thing I didn't like about Resident Evil on PlayStation, the way it controlled. It was weird. Like, you didn't press up to go up, down to go down. It's like you had to face forward and then move. You know what I'm talking about with that weird control scheme?
Yeah, I mean...
It was kind of the same thing with Tomb Raider.
Yeah, there were always issues with that, at least in the beginning, because, I think they were... Again, this was around the time... As I say, this is around the time of video gaming where, 3D was new. So they were still trying to figure out what the best way was to control it. And in my mind, they didn't really figure it out until Mario 64 came out. So when Mario 64 came out and they made it more fluid, that's when all the games, I feel like, started to get more fluid along with it. But but Resident Evil, I mean, it was very. I just remember when you would aim the gun, and then you would have to slowly pivot your character just so you can aim properly at the zombie before it got to you. It was definitely it was a painstaking process.
And the creep factor, like, really jumped up a lot in my opinion because there was really no music.
No, not really. I mean, that was the appeal of it because, like, you're just walking through this empty house and it's really quiet, and all of a sudden, like,
you hear the moaning and the groaning of the zombies.
You hear the moaning going on, or sometimes you hear them chowing down on another body or something like that, and it was just all so unnerving. And it it played well to the whole concept of like, if this were happening in real life, not in a movie, there would be no score, there would be no music. It's just going to be you and these ugly, frightening, disgusting sounds going on.
Talking about how what scared you with playing it, that's what happened to me. Now, I picked up on GameCube, so I know we're borderline with retro, but still, on GameCube, I picked up, they remade Resident Evil, and then they made Resident Evil 0, but Resident Evil, so the graphics are now upgraded to GameCube-style graphics, and I'm playing, and I get to that point, but it wasn't a dog, it was the same hallway, lights are out, I'm like, I'm going to try it here, and I'm in the basement of my parents' house, so you remember, once the lights went out, because there's really no windows, it's a basement, it was pitch dark in there, and I'm walking through the hallway, and it wasn't a dog, it was a rock that gets thrown through the window,
nice.
But still, it freaked me out. I turned the lights on, I popped the game out, I gotta play something else. Man, that even thinking about it now gave me the chills. I'm not good with jump scares.
Yeah, see, and for me, the more jump scares, the better. That's what gets my adrenaline running. That's why I love good horror movies.
There's a ton of Resident Evil. They're coming out with Resident Evil 8, right?
7?
7, excuse me, 7. So 7's about to come out. Yep, very short. Which was your favorite Resident Evil, even including some of the remakes?
Well, I have to say my heart goes to Resident Evil 2. I think they did a really good, solid job with it. You had 2 playable characters, and they both took you through 2 different stories, depending on which one you chose. Leon Kennedy or Jill Valentine. And it was just absolutely, enjoyable playing both stories, which was cool. And I felt like that gave it that replay value, which I enjoyed.
Yep.
So by far, I think, not by far, but Resident Evil 2 was probably my favorite.
I feel like I remember you playing a lot of Code Veronica as well. I don't know why.
Yeah, Code Veronica I played on Dreamcast.
Yes.
That was a really good one. That was a slog to get through. I don't know why.
Oh, really?
I had so much trouble. I had a lot of trouble with that one, more than I needed to be. But Nemesis was the relentless one.
Oh,
I remember having the hardest time getting through that one, because it's like every time you felt like you were getting somewhere, that thing would show up and just kill you.
He was even annoying in the movie.
Oh yeah, I remember him in the movie. And to that point that you bring up the movies, it's like, we talk, people talk about how video games don't really spawn good movies. I mean, and granted, I'm not saying the Resident Evil movies are the greatest movies in the world, but
they're watchable. They're good.
They're watchable, and they spawned 6 films, and now there's the 7th one coming now.
The last one,
which is the last one supposedly. I never believed that, not at all ever. So I mean,
I think Mila Jovovich is getting tired, so it may be the last one.
I think that's the problem. I think she is a zombie at this point. But yeah, I mean, just to show you that the power of a franchise.
I'll dare say that the first Resident Evil movie was a success. Even from a movie standard, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, it was a success. I mean, if I remember correctly, I think horror movies almost always make their money back. And if I remember correctly, the first Resident Evil was considered a really good success. I'm trying to remember
like the first and the third one. I don't know why the third one I think was in 3D. That was a good one too.
Was it in 3D?
One of them was in 3D, and the one that was in 3D was actually really good.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I remember I could swear the first one made the first one made like 40 million in the box office, which isn't that bad for a horror movie, especially when you're talking about a horror movie that came out in 2002.
And not only that, but a video game. That's on I'm based on a video.
Yeah.
Here we go. I don't know. You may pull it up, and you'll know this better than I do. Budget was $35 million. The box office, I don't know if this is worldwide or not, was $102.4 million.
Yeah, so that's global, and and usually when you look at the budget for a motion picture, you could almost double it when you think about the advertising campaigns and marketing that they do. So if it costs $30 million to make, it actually really costs like $60.
Yeah.
So the fact that it made 102 means it did turn a profit.
Yeah, it was
which
worldwide.
Is why, right? So if it turned a profit, that's why they obviously continued making them.
Totally. Yeah, it was about 40 million in one here in the U.S. But still, I would say of all of them, Resident Evil, and all of them are definitely watchable. The cartoon ones, the animated ones, not so much. But the live-action ones, definitely. Again, I'm looking forward to this last one, the final chapter.
Which is the sixth one, not the seventh.
Yep. And so did I see Retribution? Yeah, I saw Retribution. But bottom line,
I don't remember where I left off with them. I think I only saw the first three. Extinction was the one in Vegas.
I believe so. Yes.
Yeah, that's the last one I saw.
Oh, okay. Was that
so I'm a little behind.
Yeah, that one or Afterlife was in 3D. Oh, Afterlife, the fourth one was in 3D. That's right.
Okay.
But in any event, definitely good games, good movies. More importantly, good games. And Resident Evil is the go-to at this point, even to today with the modern systems, and there's a lot of scary games out there, but Resident Evil still holds up. I think it's just that whole zombie genre. So
and as graphics get better, obviously they offer more opportunities to scare. So you have games like the Saw games that came out, or Dead Rising, Left 4 Dead, The Evil Within. You have all these kinds of games that benefit from the great graphics and everything like that. But of course, as a retro gamer, I will always default to the classics because they were awesome.
Yeah.
And Resident Evil is a good one to end on, even though we didn't talk about probably one of the most horrific things in video game industry, which was the Virtual Boy. So so don't ever say you don't own anything horror related in the video game industry, because you do.
I did and like a zombie, it will rise from the dead one day
and kill us all.
Probably
from boredom.
And with that, how dare you, sir? And with that, we're gonna start to wrap it up. If you have your own genres, your Halloween, your scary games, let us know about it at the Facebook page. With that, be safe, Anthony. Hopefully, you'll give out a lot of candy if anyone runs into you.
I just got to go buy the razor blades.
There you go. And with that, happy Halloween, everyone. Be safe.
Happy Halloween, everybody.
Catch you next time.